President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to update the nation on the success of his administration during the delivery of the State of the Nation address tomorrow at the Cape Town City Hall. This is the 8th State of the Nation address, and it'll allow Ramaphosa to speak on the general state of the nation and reflect on a wide range of political, economic and social matters in the domestic and global spheres. Now, for the third consecutive year, SONA will take place at the Cape Town City Hall. This follows a fire incident at the parliamentary precinct in January 2022. To look at the achievements and the challenges of Ramaphosa's administration, we are joined by Sanusha Naidu, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for Global Dialogue, and Sifiso Skenjana. He's an economist and Managing Director of ESG Analytic. Both of you, thank you. Always good having you on the program. Welcome.
Thank you.
Morning, Leanne, and always lovely to be on.
Thank you. So, Sanusha, let me begin with you. I mean, this is, obviously this year SONA comes at a time when the country is marking 30 years of democracy, and we've heard that they're not holding back. They really are going to have a very celebratory and a big State of the Nation tomorrow. In fact, they've put a price tag of around 6 million rand for the event itself. Let's talk to the State of the Nation address and how important it is, and what I suppose the significance of it all is in this day and age.
Good morning, Leanne. Good morning to my colleague Sifiso, and of course to the viewers. The State of the Nation is a very important kind of roadmap for the year ahead. It sets the tone, it sets the policy trajectory, it sets the kind of key deliverables that the government would take on in the year to date. It does a reflection of the previous year. It looks at the role of particular institutions, their accomplishments, their achievements, the challenges, the difficulties, areas where government did not perform as adequately as it should. And it sets a tone of attitude. It also reestablishes and reaffirms, in many ways, the social contract between state and citizen. This year's State of the Nation, even if it's a price tag of 6 million rand, it's still quite a high price tag, considering where we are and considering the fact that reports have suggested that the bigger challenge in this year would be later in February when the finance minister unveils the budget speech. Now, with the budget deficit rising at about 6%, and the fact of the matter is that petrol and other petroleum products have gone up astronomically, it's going to have an important impact, snowballing effect on food inflation, consumer price inflation, etc. And that means that we're going to have to start looking at the logistics of how much it's going to cost ordinary South Africans to buy food, how much it's going to cost ordinary South Africans to pay for their transport, because the bulk of South Africans rely on public transport, how much it's going to cost South Africans in general just to live. And I think this, again, is going to be critical for this State of the Nation, because it comes in the year where an election looms very, very close. And this election is also very, very important in the context of whether or not we're going to see people come out to vote. We know that the IEC has said that it added 1.2 million people to the voters' roll over the last election weekend registration. But this is the last one. Until the president announces the election date, I think people may not have the opportunity to register, or if they do after the announcement of the date, then it will only be online or at IEC offices. And I think this, again, is not about the pomp and ceremony. It's not about, oh, let's celebrate 30 years of democracy. Let's be sedate about it, and let's start asking, what haven't we done well in the last 15 to 20 years of this democracy?
And that's the big questions that we need to look at now. And I just want to get the logistics out of the way, because we do know the price tag. We do know there's a lot of pomp and ceremony. We do know that, it has been said that there'll be sort of, it will be all out there to celebrate, what we've achieved. But my question, and I suppose a very important question, I mean, this in the background to the fact that we still have a parliamentary precinct and a parliamentary building that's burnt down. That's set to cost, what was an estimated 2 billion rand that would be completed by next year. It still isn't. I'm not sure if work has actually begun in refurbishing it. You know, it's not to bring it down on the occasion, but the bottom line is that, and I think you did this well in terms of, very briefly, Sanusha, talking to the state of the lives of South Africans, because that actually is the important part, that the lives of South Africans are very difficult right now. And so let me bring you in here, Sifiso. You know, on the backdrop of the country and where we're at right now, what can the president stand and celebrate right now after his term? What has he really done?
I mean, I think, Glenn, certainly I think a number of ways in which we can skin the cat in terms of looking at the things we can celebrate. I think if it is a conversation about 30 years of democracy, I think there's a lot to celebrate in terms of some of the social infrastructure that has been rolled out to ensure that I think we have a lot more inclusive government insofar as the services that it does render to the South African citizens. I think there's a lot to celebrate as well in terms of some of the investment that started to go, of course, into the modernization of some of the rural communities that wouldn't have inherently had access. Some of the other issues around really setting up certain structures, whether it is around cooperative structures to help people participate more in agriculture, etc. I think there's a lot of growth in that particular context and using that particular lens. But I think where we become disillusioned is the government of today. The issues we are facing today are living, cost standards. Just to give you some context, Leanne, only about 89, actually there's about as much as 89% of the companies in South Africa right now don't pay or don't comply with minimum wage requirements. And that is 4,600 Rand when the actual living wage is about 7,700 Rand. That tells you a lot of the people who are working in South Africa are what we call working poor, in that they get their salaries, but they don't make it to the end of the month. So you've got a government who hasn't been able to enforce that. I think you've got a government in a today context where institutions, I think, have really, gone backwards in terms of the quality of those institutions and how then they bring services to the people as well as, of course, the unemployment context, which really talks about the structure of our economy in the way in which we are intentional and what strategic programs we put in as government to make sure that we improve the employment outcomes of specifically young people in the country. And I think the government of today makes it very difficult to celebrate a lot. But I think if you look, of course, over the 30-year period, there's definitely big gains compared to the apartheid, administration that we were under at that point in time.
And I suppose that will be a big focus, is the 30 years, because if we make those years a little bit smaller, and let's just take the time that we've had President Cyril Ramaphosa at the helm. I mean, when he delivered his first State of the Nation address, it was to a nation that was hanging on to every word, a nation that was listening and hearing that we were going to cut down the size of the government and that there were too many people within the ranks of government, costing too much. We've seen, in fact, the opposite of that. We've seen 2 ministers added onto the portfolio. Lifestyle audits, we haven't seen those as yet. Performance appraisals, we haven't seen those as yet. In fact, they're scared to make those public in case, according to the words of government, is saying they'll be used by opposition parties to electioneer against them. But, the reality is that most of the promises that have been made have not been fulfilled. So, let me get your perspective of where we stand and the state of the nation under President Cyril Ramaphosa. And let me ask that to you, Sanusha. Sorry, Sanusha, may I ask you that question?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that you can celebrate, but it's a very conditional success or set of successes. It's a very conditional set of victories that you have. Because if the benchmark that you're going to be using is, if you take the January 8th statement that the president made, and the benchmark is, if you don't vote for the ANC, or if it was the ANC in itself that provided social grants, and without us, you won't have social grants. Or the fact that, as Sifiso had rightly pointed out, there's no accountability or enforcement of legislation. Or the fact of the matter is, Leanne, you spoke about performance appraisal. Well, one of the taglines of the president's presidency and New Dawn was consequent management, which is very much part of how do you deal with non-performing ministries, non-performing ministers. And of course, if you're adding more to the wage bill of the state, that doesn't really bode well. So I think it's going to be, for me, sitting as somebody on the outside looking in, I think, yes, we're going to say, okay, fine. Yeah, you did some good things. You brought in these very important dimensions and dynamics of state accountability. My mind goes back to the president's testimony, both as the ANC president and the president of the Republic of South Africa, to the Zondo Commission, where acknowledgement of the structural challenges, the inherent institutional challenges that underpin both the state and the party, and the kind of assurances that were given, which never really came through. So one of the other issues that I think is very much part of why we haven't been able to see effective and critical movement in terms of putting into place those levels and levers of accountability and traction around transparency and issues with regard to consequent management and how do you deal with your cabinet, is really the fact that it didn't seem as if the Zondo Commission recommendations have taken root in this whole thing, despite what the president said. Yeah. And so you're going to have an electorate or a citizenship or a citizenry sitting tomorrow evening. And the big question is going to be, how many of them are going to be able to watch the State of the Nation or hear the State of the Nation address if they are in load shedding? Because they're not going to hear the president. And so I think these victories and these kinds of successes, which I think is going to be very much about, don't forget who actually liberated you and brought democracy to South Africa. It's political rights are fantastic. All of us have it. We all can enjoy it. But it's the socio-economic rights that become compromised in the democracy and don't actually have people being able to enjoy those rights. Waiting 30 years later for a toilet that is not necessarily a pit latrine, waiting 30 years later for their homes, which they were promised, waiting 30 years later for the roads to be done so that rural development can actually connect the roads to the economic markets of the urban center. Those things are not out.
No, Sanusha, and those are important points. I've got to start wrapping, so I'm going to give the last word to you, Sifiso. But first, Sanusha, I want to take a bet with you. I reckon load shedding will be suspended tomorrow night so that the nation can listen. But I don't think it'll be suspended. Tomorrow night it'll be suspended for State of the Nation, but tonight for the match, I don't think so. That's just my guess, but I might be totally off. Finally, Sifiso, the president has always been one that stood up and said that no progress can be made without a capable state. But he constantly gives reasons as to why we can't move forward. And there always seems to be three reasons that he gives. First, it's the economic condition that the world finds itself in right now and the wars and all of these that are going on. State capture, which you alluded to there as well in your answer, Sanusha, in terms of state capture and those wasted years. And then, of course, COVID. Those are always brought up in the president's answers. But in terms of what you've just said, and Sifiso, I hand this to you, are those real impediments? I mean, yes, but can things not have progressed further in these years, in your opinion? If I can ask you to keep it quite short.
Well, I mean, there are real issues, Leanne, but I think there's certainly many other issues. South Africa was once ranked about 26 in terms of world of the ease of doing business, and now we're about 84, and I think we are regressing. That's telling you that that's informed by many other issues, impediments structurally that we're not responding to. And so I think all the things that are supposed to support the growth and development of small and medium enterprises, all the things that are supposed to support new research and R&D coming into the economy, all the things that are supposed to support the financial inclusion, I think all of those things have not been addressed. And that's government's role as well, whether through SEDA, CIFA, and many other government agencies, to make sure. SALGA also hasn't come through alongside MISA in supporting local government development. We know that about 87% of our municipalities are currently broke. So these are all the things that are making it incredibly difficult either to do service delivery, but also for the network industries, for agriculture to function when there are no roads, for transport to be integrated if we're not having a functional local government. And so those are all the things that I think must come up in this conversation, and particularly capacity building at a local government point of view to ensure that we have enough capacity to deliver.